네, 그럼 지금부터 글로벌 이노베이션 포럼 2010의 첫 번째 세션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 이번 세션의 연사와 좌장님께서는 모두 무대 위로 올라와 착석해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. So right now, the first session of the Global Innovation Forum 2010 will start. So I'd like to ask all the speakers and the moderator of the first session, please come up on the stage and be seated. Thank you. 네, 첫 번째 세션 시작하기 전에 다시 한번 안내 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 본 세션에는 동시 통역이 제공될 예정입니다. 한국어는 1번, 영어는 2번, 중국어는 3번입니다. 필요한 언어 선택하셔서 들으시면 많은 도움이 될 것 같습니다. 감사합니다. One more announcement, ladies and gentlemen. For this first session, the simultaneous interpretation will be continuously provided. The Korean is channel 1, English channel 2, and Chinese number 3. So please choose the language channel of your choice. Thank you. 네, 이번 세션의 주제는 국가 경쟁력입니다. 서울대학교 조동성 교수님, 서울대학교 문휘창 교수님, 미국 경쟁력위원회 윌리엄 베이츠 부위원장님, 싱가포르 아시아 경쟁력 연구소 니오 분시용 소장님, 핀란드 기술혁신청 라인의 헤르만스 디렉터님의 주제 발표가 차례로 이어지겠습니다. 좌장은 한국경제연구원의 김영용 원장님께서 맡아 진행해 주시겠습니다. 원장님 부탁드립니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Young-Yong, the president of the Korea Economic Research Institute. I am very honored to be here as the moderator of this morning session of the Global Innovation Forum 2010, which is now being held in Seoul under the banner of cooperation beyond the competition. Global Innovation Forum, as you know, started in 2006 to offer opportunity to domestic and foreign opinion leaders for discussing various agendas on nations' development and growth of business firms. I welcome every one of you to this morning session of the forum. In the morning session, we have 5 speakers for 180 minutes, 3 hours. I'm just gonna introduce the speakers briefly, and detailed information will be given on the speakers when his turn of presentation comes. From the next to me, Bill Bates, is let me look at it. Vice President of the Council on Competitiveness from USA. And Dr. Dong-Sung Cho, Professor of Seoul National University. And Hwy-Chang Moon, Professor, Seoul National University. And Boon Siong, Director, Asia Competitiveness Institute of Singapore. And finally, Raine Hermans, Director, Finnish Funding Agency for Technology and Innovation. Welcome every one of speakers. Okay, we have 3 hours for 5 speakers, so to budget our time carefully, I'm gonna give, say, 25 minutes for each presenter. Is that okay? You can use 30 minutes maximum. And 45 minutes will be allocated to discussion amongst the speakers and the audience in the floor. And the 10 minutes intermission break we are going to have. Okay, I'm going to introduce the Bill Bates, the first speaker, who is going to talk about the national competitiveness in a global economy. William Bates is a vice president at the Council on Competitiveness, and he manages the council's outreach and message to members of Congress, the administration, and the governors, and serves currently as the director of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Council, a network of over 30 competitiveness councils from around the world, committed to sharing best practices, identifying global competitiveness principles, and seeking to better understand the drivers of national prosperity in a global economy. Bill previously served as director of government relations for the United States Telecom Association. With more than 16 years experience working for and with government policymakers, Bill brings a unique combination of political and policy expertise to the Council. He holds a master's degree in government from the Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor degree in government and history from Cornell University. Please welcome him with warm and big applause. Yeah.
Podium over there.
If you want.
Previous page. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here today to the Global Innovation Forum. Thank you. It's good to see our partners again with the Presidential Council on National Competitiveness. I'm told that I have more slides than anyone else, so I'm going to try to move very quickly. So let me just jump right in, assuming that this works. There we go. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to very briefly give you a little feel for the Council on Competitiveness and how we operate in the United States. I'm going to talk about the United States economy and where it stands right now in the global economy. Then I want to focus on some fundamental changes that are underway in the global economy and how that's impacting national competitiveness in the United States, but also in other countries around the world. Then I want to spend just a few minutes talking about how the U.S. Council is responding to these challenges and what our members are telling us need to be the policies on which we begin to focus. And then finally, I will just talk briefly about some thoughts about why the U.S. has been the global innovation leader and some concerns that I have about why that leadership might be at risk. So very quickly, the U.S. Council is a membership organization of CEOs, university presidents, and labor leaders. We are strictly a private sector organization. We do work with government, but we don't have any direct government involvement. As it says here on the slide, we're non-profit, nonpartisan. Our core mission is U.S. competitiveness in the global marketplace. Just to give you an idea of the sorts of people that are engaged in the council, Sam Allen, who's the CEO of Deere, is our chairman. Mike Splinder, the CEO of Applied Materials. Again, we have university representation, labor leader representation. Importantly, these are the decision makers in their organizations. So when we bring this group together and they come together around a recommendation or a policy idea, they can go back to their companies, back to their universities and just say, get it done. And change happens. So that's how they impact the private sector. When this group of cross-sector leaders comes together on a policy idea and takes it to our government, it's a very powerful message. And that's how we impact public policy. Now I just want to talk very briefly about how we measure, from the Council's perspective, where America is in the global economy. Since we were founded back in 1986, one of the core products that we put together is something we call a competitiveness index. And this is just a way of benchmarking America's performance in the global economy. It's a snapshot in time, but it is useful to sort of measure where things stand. This first slide, and I will fully admit it's a couple years out of date, but this first slide just demonstrates how large the U.S. economy really is. And it's been growing at about 3%. since World War II. Now, obviously, the last couple of years, and all of these countries have dipped down, and hopefully now we're headed back towards these numbers. But the way the size of the economy is represented by the bars, the growth rate by the circles. So while the U.S. is continuing to grow, it's obviously not growing as fast as many other countries. Click, there we go. The U.S. consumer market is also the largest in the world. We're driving export growth in countries across the globe. Now, I would highlight Mexico and Canada, obviously, with whom we share a border as our largest export partners. But you can see along the bottom there that 32% of China's export growth, 11% here in South Korea, 21% Brazil. Our consumer market is obviously very, very large. And it would make sense, given this consumer market, that we would attract foreign direct investment. And as this next chart shows, that's exactly the case. We attract the largest amount of foreign direct investment by quite a margin. However, you can see several of those trend lines are showing that there are other countries as well that continue to drive and attract foreign direct investment. So from a U.S. perspective, we look at our economy and we say it's the largest economy in the world, it's growing. Our consumer market is driving exports all over the world. Foreign direct investment continues to be very high. So why is it that we continue to see headlines like these? U.S. losing edge on export-led growth. On innovation, U.S. said to be losing competitive edge. U.S. may face years of sluggish growth. I think about it a little bit like this. Sometimes you may be walking along the sidewalk or driving your car and you begin to daydream a little bit, and you're thinking about something else, and then suddenly you look around and you think, how did I get where I am? I think this is a little bit about how the United States has approached competitiveness up until the last couple of years. We were very comfortable cruising along with our 3% growth. Meanwhile, the world has been changing rapidly around us. Let's take a quick look at some of those changes. This first slide just sort of demonstrates the impact that emerging markets are having on the global economy, in that they are expanding their share of global investment flows around the world, from gross domestic product to exports to imports to energy consumption, and also, as we saw on the previous slide, foreign direct investment. Obviously, emerging markets' populations are growing tremendously. The U.S., one of the only industrialized countries that's still showing population growth. You can see Russia, Japan, the EU, with all declining population growth. By 2020, estimates are that 80% of the world's middle-class consumers will live outside of the current industrialized world. This is a major, major shift. And it's not only population and demographics that are changing. The old model of what a business is in many ways disappearing. When we think about a company that manages its exports, it's no longer the corporate headquarters located in one spot and they make the product and then they ship it all over the world. It's now that there's a global supply chain. Companies ship product within the corporation, they build it one place, they research it another, they market it somewhere else. And as this chart is showing, US multinationals sold 3 times more through their foreign operations than they did through straight exports. And so when you look at a chart like this, you start to ask, what does the trade deficit really mean anymore? Now, a key driver, I think, that we would all agree of innovation capacity is research. And research is another fundamental change in how it's done, where it's done, who's doing it. And I realize this chart is a little headache-inducing, but what it's trying to demonstrate is that the U.S. does have the largest overall R&D investment, but it's certainly not the country that's growing its investment as quickly as many others. You see, for example, China there on the far right with a growth rate of over 19.3%. So all these changes are impacting the way the global economy functions and how a country's competitiveness is measured. Emerging markets are increasing their share of GDP, they're growing their middle class, companies are evolving into multinational global enterprises, research has become global. But none of it may be as disruptive as the pace at which all of this is happening. What this chart is showing here is how quickly various technologies reached a market of 50 million people. And you can see radio took 38 years, television 13, on down to Facebook, which took 1 year to reach 50 million people. Think about how this would impact somebody's education and skills. A generation ago, somebody could have an entire career based on a particular skill set. They could retire and then, their children could learn something new and deal with the next technology. Now, a year, 2 years, 5 years, and suddenly the skills you have may become obsolete, may change. It's a fundamental way in which we need to look about how do we educate, how do we get people understanding that learning is a lifelong effort now. It's not get your degree and then you know everything you need to know for the rest of your life. So the question that we ask at the U.S. Council is, how should the U.S. respond to these challenges? How do we deal with this rise of multiple competitors, or as we're saying today, probably appropriately, collaborators? At the top of the list for the U.S. Council is obviously innovation. Innovation is what drives economic growth. This is a nice quote here from the chief economist at Business Week. Without innovation, the long-term growth rate of the American economy would have been closer to 2.5% instead of the 3.6% it was. I mean, the implications of that statement are, if the growth rate had been lower for the U.S., our economy may have been as much as 40% smaller. And think about what the implication of that would be for jobs, for new industries. So if innovation is the key to economic growth, and I think it's generally accepted that two of the foundations of innovation growth are science, technology, engineering, and math education, and investment in research. And these are two areas of large concern for the United States. In this chart, what we're showing here is that 15-year-olds in the United States ranked 21st and 25th in math in an international test. And this is just among OECD countries. If we include every country that took the test, we drop to 29th in science and 35th in math. And our investment in research is equally as concerning. With the exception of life sciences, which is the big line up there on the top, our investment in R&D has basically been flat over the last 2 decades, with the exception of the last couple of years where we've begun to see some real improvement. But our growing deficits in the U.S. are challenging whether or not this investment and this commitment can be maintained. Now, I said there was some improvement in the last couple of years, and that was a little bit of a self-serving comment. Because 4 years ago, the U.S. Council issued a report called Innovate America, which is the cover there on the right. And what we did is we called on the U.S. government to focus their efforts on an innovation agenda, an agenda that included talent, STEM education, multidisciplinary research and scientists, lifelong learning, investment, more funding for research, tax credits for companies doing new research, and infrastructure like broadband, patent reform, upgrading lab facilities. And in many ways, policymakers listened to us. We passed a piece of legislation called the America Competes Act, which included funding for STEM education and more research. The stimulus bill that was passed in the U.S. at the beginning of last year included significant money for upgrading scientific lab facilities and making a renewed commitment to energy research. The challenge, though, really is going to be, as we face the deficits that the United States is currently facing, can we continue to make these investments, even while we recognize that our long-term long-term economic health requires it. The other challenge we have is it's not just policymakers that need to be convinced that these are worthwhile investments. What this chart is showing, and I'm sorry I don't have any data for Korea on this chart, but what this chart is showing is how confident are people that innovation is going to improve their lives. Because for many people, innovation does not mean better health care, cheaper products, the next generation iPod. For many people, innovation means my factory job has been replaced by robotics, or now I have to deal with a technology that I don't understand and I don't have the skills to participate in. If you think back to that chart on the pace of innovation and how disruptive that can be, you can begin to understand why a country like the United States could have 40% of its population uncertain about whether innovation is something that's good for them or not. Let me just turn very quickly to two other initiatives that the Council is focused on. Two issues that we actually highlighted in our innovation report but didn't have the time, the resources to fully focus on them. And that's energy policy and manufacturing. Now, the first one is a tremendous challenge that has to be addressed. The second one, though, is an opportunity that we should not miss. I think everyone's probably seen a chart similar to this recently as the energy debate has continued. But global energy demand is supposed to increase by as much as 44%. If this trend continues, we're going to use more energy in the next 50 years than we've used since we began using energy in recorded history. Now, the U.S. is, I don't want to use the term an abuser, but we use more energy than anybody else does. We have 5% of the world's population, and we use 25% of the energy. And just to make matters worse, we don't use it very efficiently. So in short, what the Council has put forth to our policymakers is that we need a comprehensive energy policy. If we don't do this, then the risks we're taking are tremendous. We risk losing more production. We risk losing technological leadership. If we don't overhaul our electric grid, we're not going to be able to bring on new renewable sources of energy. We're not going to solve grand challenges like a better battery for storage or carbon capture and sequestration. And we're not going to have the workforce we need. And that's why the Council released this report, which is highlighted, the cover's highlighted there on the right, my right, called Drive. In the interest of time, I won't go over all the details of it. But what it basically called for was a comprehensive approach to energy. There's no one silver bullet to solve the energy problem or the energy challenge and the climate change challenge. All these issues need to be looked at. Greater efficiency, greater investment in all different energy resources, workforce training, investment in research, as I said. Now, we've actually been making some progress on this. I highlighted the effort out of the stimulus package that focused on energy research, but there's so much more to do, and this disaster that is ongoing in the Gulf of Mexico right now with the oil spill is making it even harder in our country to get any kind of consensus on being able to move forward. And if we don't meet this challenge of energy, we risk missing an opportunity in manufacturing. These are some survey results that we're going to be releasing at the Council this week, tomorrow in fact, which is why I can't stay this afternoon and enjoy the rest of the session. I have to be back for this event tomorrow. But we are releasing a global CEO survey on manufacturing where we ask CEOs around the world, among other things, which countries are the most competitive from a manufacturing standpoint. And the US came in not first, but fifth. And you can see on this chart there, Korea was third. This is very, very concerning data to our policymakers. And the reason it matters so much is because of information like this, which is the opportunity in these new clean energy sectors. Just looking at biofuels, wind power, and solar power, here's 3 areas that are expected to double over the next decade. These are new jobs, new industries, if we're able to take advantage of them. What the Council, U.S. Council is undertaking right now is to convene a summit next year and deliver to the administration an action plan on manufacturing. We're engaging over 40 of our CEO members. We are working with the White House. We are working with the Congress. And underpinning all this work is a recognition that making things still matters. We may have thought that we could become strictly a service economy, and everything could be built and made elsewhere. We were wrong. And now is when the U.S. Council is working hard with our policymakers to try and correct that misperception. I want to talk just here about the fact that in almost everything I've said today, it's implied that none of these challenges, none of these opportunities take place solely within a nation's borders. We live in a global economy. The problems are global. The opportunities are global. And the Council on Competitiveness has a long history of working bilaterally with other countries around the world to better understand what competitiveness means in those countries and what the impacts might be on our American businesses, universities, workers. Last year, with the help and the engagement of partners like the Presidential Council on National Competitiveness, we formed the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. As you can see from this slide, the intent was to establish a network of global leaders committed to national prosperity and to prosperity of the world. This was completely consistent with the U.S. Council's mission. We still, to this day, get questions from our members asking, why is the U.S. Council working with a global federation? Yet we'd identified in reports that we've written over the last few years how interconnected the world's global economies are and how this integration creates this interdependency that's critical to understand if our companies and our organizations are going to be successful. Very quickly, this is just a slide highlighting who the founding members are. We've recently added an organization from India as well. So you can see there's a tremendous geographic diversity from around the world. The purpose of the GFCC, or rather some of the initiatives we're going to be working on this year, including putting forth a statement of competitiveness principles for what competition and competitiveness means in the global economy. As the chairman said, we're going to be working together to analyze current indices and discuss whether or not these are the right measurements and whether they're adequately determining a country's competitiveness. And then we will be meeting again at the end of this year in Washington, D.C. I know I'm short on time, so let me just conclude with a couple final thoughts. And these are related a little bit more to culture and emotion, if you will, than to policy. But it's something that I think is vital if the United States is going to maintain its ability to tackle challenges like energy and opportunities like manufacturing. And that's our historic ability and willingness to take risk. As these little pictures show, in many ways, risk has become a bad word. Yet it was risk that sent a man to the moon. It was risk that drove our innovation-based growth in the U.S. economy since World War II. It was risk that was enabled by government and led by the private sector. But what happens if policymakers start to view risk as a negative? For reasons that might be perfectly understandable, and probably are perfectly understandable, many policymakers have barricaded themselves in government buildings to provide themselves a sense of safety and security. They broadcast warnings that make us all just a little more suspicious of each other. And as the chart on the bottom right there shows, I'm not sure you can read it, but what it's showing is our research grants are more and more often being given to older, more established researchers, rather than taking chances on something new, something unproven, something that very well might fail, but something that if it succeeded could change the way we live, we work, we play. I mean, at our heart, I think Americans remain rebels, if you will. And there are certainly pockets of innovation that flourish, whether it's the creation of the X Games with people like Shaun White there, the Olympic gold medal snowboarder, or whether it's challenges like the X Prize there as private companies try to send men and women into space on their own. there's certainly a culture of exploration and risk-taking that continues. The question is, what happens if risk aversion overtakes risk-taking? Let me conclude with this little picture of a garage. And this is a garage in Silicon Valley, California. It's a place where over 70 years ago, two men took all the money they had, which was at the time, I think about $600. They had a set of used equipment that they'd borrowed, bought at secondhand stores, and they created a company called Hewlett-Packard. And when they needed to, they used the stove in the house that was next door if they needed to heat something. But they were willing to take the risks and willing to try something outside the box. And that's the kind of entrepreneurship, creativity, commitment to something new, and collaboration that we need to encourage. It's a willingness to take a risk. So thank you very much. Very much appreciate being with you here today.
Thank you, Bill. I especially thank you for keeping the time limit sharp. Okay, I have one announcement. We are going to have a 10 minutes break after Dr. Hwy-Chang finished his presentation. Okay, next speaker is Dr. Dong-Sung Cho. He's going to talk about the IPS, National Competitiveness Research, 2010 to 2011. Let me briefly introduce the Dr. Cho. Dong-Sung Cho is a professor of strategy and international business and management design at Seoul National University. He received a doctoral degree from Harvard University School and worked at the Gulf Oils Planning Group before joining Seoul National University. He was Dean of the College of Business Administration of Seoul National University and Dean of the Graduate School of International and Area Studies of Seoul National University. He is honorary Consul General of Finland in Korea. He was president of Korean Academic Society of Business Administration. He was also the chair of the Committee for Government Innovation Management and the Committee for Synergistic Cooperation between big and small corporations jointly with Prime Minister of Korea. Since 2008, he has been in the Presidential Council for National Competitiveness of Korea. Okay. Dr. Joe, would you start?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and privilege to be presenting to you the result of IPS National Competitiveness Research 2010 and 2011. Indeed, IPS has been presenting this research result for the last 10 years, but this is the first year that we are doing it in collaboration with the government of Korea, especially the Presidential Council on National Competitiveness, and also this year presentation will be the beginning of probably a long journey into the future where Global Competitiveness Council that Mr. Bates represent and the Korean team will put their effort together to develop a more comprehensive model and also for the whole world. And let me start by introducing to you the methodology of the model and then analysis and the result. Since, however, in most recent years, China has been rapidly growing into becoming indeed one of the most potent and powerful force in the global economy. I would spend some time in the last minute on the way for China, as well as Japan and Korea, which constitute the regional bloc in East Asia, how these three countries can compete and also cooperate one another for the prosperity of this region and eventual contribution to the world prosperity. Well, our research has been analyzed for 60-some countries in the world, but from year to year, we have changed the membership of the research slightly because there are some countries that are emerging, and at the same time, the data availability varies from year to year. This year, we have eliminated Laos, but we have added Trinidad and Tobago. So we have 67 countries altogether. In the past, we have been using the data from KOTRA, Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, but from last year, we have started to use the rich data from the members of AIB. AIB represents Academy of International Business, which comprise about 3,000 plus members of scholars and professors from all over the world. And this addition of the data from AIB members has enriched and the robustness of the data we have been using. There are 21 countries in Europe, 25 countries in Asia, 13 countries in America, and 2 countries in Oceania, and also 6 countries in Africa, representing the database in our research. Now the IPS model. Indeed, Michael Porter's model, which is called Diamond, has been very popular, and indeed it has been used in a number of countries. And this diamond depicted in the left part of this slide. That is, factor conditions, business context, related and supporting industries, and demand conditions. This model has been very effective in analyzing the level of competitiveness of many countries, especially advanced countries. However, as any model is destined to be, this model also is limited to a certain degree, especially when this model is used to the countries that are not fully developed. There are only about 20-some countries in the world that can be considered fully developed, and there are more than 200 countries in the world, and therefore probably around 200 countries are not yet the level of fully developed countries. And for these 200 so countries, this diamond by Michael Porter is somewhat limited because this model has 4 factors which are more or less physical in nature, and therefore it does not show how each of these factors can change from one level to another. It is people, workers, government, especially policymakers and bureaucrats in the government, and entrepreneurs and professional managers, engineers, designers, and so on. It is these people who can change the physical factors depicted in the left side of this slide, that is Professor Michael Porter's diamond. So in our model, we have added 4 human factors that are depicted on the right side of this table. That is politicians and bureaucrats, workers, entrepreneurs and professionals. So in our model, we are using these 4 physical factors and 4 human factors to make the model more or less comprehensive, and at the same time to make the model more dynamic in nature so that a country can use this model to shift its level of competitiveness from less developed stage to more developed. Now, using this framework, we have collected data from 67 countries, and here is the result for this year. Well, Singapore ranks number 1, and United States follows, and Netherlands, Canada, and Denmark, and so on. Unfortunately, countries in like Iran and Libya are standing at the bottom. Now, there are some countries that we need to observe more in depth. First, Korea is ranked 21. Well, indeed, last year, Korea was ranked 23rd, and this year, we show that Korea has been up by 2 levels. Oops. And then, Japan. Oops. Wait, please. Okay. China is ranked 15. Well, there is a dramatic surge of Chinese competitiveness in the last year. And then Japan, number 22. For the first time, Japan is down below Korea. But now we have another character that differentiates our model from the models of IMD or WF. That is, companies, for example, compete with other companies with strategy. Strong companies compete with strong companies, and weak companies compete with weak companies. Companies that have low cost or low price compete with the companies that produce low cost or low price, and the companies that produce high quality products will compete with the companies with high quality products. The same is true with the countries. Advanced countries compete with more or less high quality